I haven't been able to sleep through the night since mid-March. Usually I wake up around 3 a.m. in a fog, my heart pounding and my mind racing. Pandemic, isolation, suffering, civil unrest, injustice, violence, anger, fear, fires, murder hornets. And then I actually do practice what Rabbi Daniels taught us last week. I look around and name the first 5 things I can see. This calms me only enough to think to myself, is all of this really happening? I wonder if this is something you have experienced in some way too. I'd love to know. If we were together, I'd be able to look at you and see if you were nodding or not. But alas, this is just one more of the many losses we've accumulated over these last many months. So many of the assumptions that anchored us, or the markers we always used to chart our lives before, gone. It's disorienting, and it makes it difficult to discern, no less navigate through it all to the other, we pray, better side. More than once, I have found myself yearning for one of those big maps in the mall. Remember malls? With an arrow pointing to a distinctive red dot noting, "You are here," and then a big green dot somewhere else that says, "When things are better." So it would be simple to see how to get from here to there. It turns out there's actually a whole field of study behind those mall maps called wayfinding, a discipline that entails a set of design principles concerned with easing navigation around shared spaces. But wayfinding comes from a significantly older practice by the same name, referring to techniques used by travelers over both land and sea on relatively unmarked routes to previously undiscovered destinations. In wayfinding, both then and now, there are 4 necessary criteria: orientation, route decision, monitoring, and recognition. And of note is that just as wayfinding helps navigating treks or multi-storied buildings, so too can it help us as we navigate the challenges of our lives when we find ourselves along unmarked routes to yet-to-be-discovered destinations. So says Jewish tradition, at least, as the Torah seems to have scooped most traditional wayfinding methods by at least 1,000 years. So we find ourselves now 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, 10 days into a new year, with no clear roadmap, no horizon line to mark the end of what feels like utter chaos. Perhaps it's time for us to consider a little Jewish wayfinding to clear a path through this truly uncharted territory. Step 1, orientation, identifying our current position. Consider the very first question God asks in Torah. It comes just after Adam and Eve have eaten the forbidden fruit. Feeling ashamed, they hide in the garden, but God then calls out to Adam, "Where are you?" Now, nearly every commentator agrees this cannot be a question about Adam's physical location because, of course, God knows where he is. Instead, the question is a spiritual one. The Talmud says God's question notes a shift in Adam's soul. And as such, God is really asking about the direction of Adam's heart. How has his spiritual stance changed as a result of his actions? Where is he now? Where are you? We shouldn't assume it's an easy question to answer. Like Adam and Eve, we convince ourselves we can hide, telling stories that make things appear to be one way when our fuller, truer realities often prove quite different. It's like being on Zoom with a close-up shot of you dressed professionally, a lovely plant or calming painting in the background, but then pull the shot wider to capture 360 degrees of true reality, revealing that your camera is stacked up on a pile of books, precariously perched on an old ladder whose splintering rungs are strewn with laundry, toys and takeout boxes pepper the floor, and you are not wearing pants. But the hiding we do on Zoom is just a mild symptom of our profound human discomfort with the truth of our imperfections. This question of where are you is at the heart of any cheshbon hanefesh process, the honest soul introspection that we are taught must precede meaningful repentance and returning. We spend so much time telling ourselves that we are only the way we are because someone else did something first. Besides this being the gateway to hypocrisy, it is ultimately a lie we tell to let ourselves off the hook. If we cannot or are not willing to discern where we truly are, or take accountability for that, or worse, if we tell ourselves we're somewhere else entirely, it will only steer us further off course. Our agency and ability to navigate in life rests on the truth of our ability to control how we are in this world, how we respond to whatever challenges we face. This is the only starting point that matters. One of my favorite stories drives the message home. A woman is in a supermarket following a grandfather and his poorly behaved 3-year-old grandchild. It's obvious to her that he has his hands full with the child screaming for candy, cookies, you name it. Meanwhile, Grandpa's working his way around, saying in a controlled voice, "Easy, William, we won't be long, easy, boy." Every outburst, "It's okay, William, just a couple more minutes and we'll be out of here. Hang in there, boy." With each outburst, the grandpa calmly responds, William, relax, don't get upset. We'll be home in 5 minutes. Stay cool, William." Very impressed, the woman goes outside where the grandfather is now loading his groceries and his grandchild into the car. "It's none of my business," she says, "but you were amazing in there. William is very lucky to have you as his grandfather." "Thanks," says the grandpa, "but I'm William. The kid is Kevin." Step 2, root decision, identifying another point along the way. In a spiritual framework, this step involves understanding where we are in relation to others. Thus enter the second question in Torah. After God accepts Abel's offering, but not his brother Cain's, Cain is thrown into a fit of jealousy and kills Abel. God inquires of Cain, "Where is your brother?" Here, too, God knows exactly where Abel is. So implied within the question is this notion of human responsibility for each other. That's why when Cain infamously and wrongly responds to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" the result is that he's banished forever. His own journey completely cut off because he fails to see that our individual wayfinding rests not just on knowing where we are, ourselves, what our story is, but on whether we notice the others, their stories, all of them, traveling the road beside us. Where is your brother? The condition of our fellows directly impacts the course of our own lives. Some of you may have seen the large framed quote in my office from my friend and colleague, Rabbi Jason Rosenberg, that reads, "They're not my problem," appears exactly never in Jewish texts. That's because a life that begins and ends with only my self-interests never grows or really goes anywhere. But a life in which I can move from concern over my own well-being to that of my brother, my sister, my fellow human being, now that opens up a channel to a life with movement. Ultimately, this is about inclusive empathy. Remember empathy? If you are listening at all and do not feel for Black people who are terrified, exhausted, who are grieving, who are, then you do not know where your brother is. If you are listening at all and do not feel for police officers who are terrified, exhausted, who are grieving, who are, then you don't know where your sister is. If you are listening and do not know or feel for everyone around you that they are terrified, that they are exhausted, that they are grieving, then you do not know where your fellow is. You may as well be Cain. There is nowhere to go if we cannot go there together. The philosopher Martin Buber drives this point home. We are created along with one another and directed to a life with one another. Creatures are placed in my way so that I, their fellow creature, by means of them and with them, can find the way to God. Consider the incredible story of Dr. Ludwig Guttmann, from Germany in 1933. After escaping, he flees to England, eventually to head the first ever dedicated medical facility for the treatment of paraplegics. Gutman arrives to a horrific scene. The patients, mostly soldiers injured in war, were kept heavily sedated, as the medical belief at the time was that recovery was not possible. But Gutman saw their humanity. He cut their sedatives in half, got them sitting up. He even forced them to play catch. Each move did cause significant pain. Gutman was accused of cruelty. The lead physician overseeing the tribunal asked him, "These are moribund cripples. Who do you think they are?" To which Gutman famously now replied, "They are the best of men." Eventually, Gutman got the patients out into the hospital garden in wheelchairs. Then he got them to play games, with the hospital doctors going in wheelchairs to compete against the patients, who were now enlivened, excited, feeling purpose in their lives. The process grew into a national competition and in 1948 took international status alongside the Olympics. These parallel games were recognized in 1968 as an official part of the Olympics, birthing the Paralympic Games, with over 160 countries competing in 2016. Gutman didn't know what the ultimate destination would be, but he was able to discern a point outside of his own starting point. He saw his fellow human beings. He saw them for their humanity, and he transcended himself to travel a new and better path alongside them. Step 3, monitoring, navigating well along the way. This step is all about ensuring progress in the right direction and making changes as necessary. So travel back to our ancestors as they journeyed from slavery to freedom. Having left Egypt, the Israelites journey into the wilderness where they hit their first significant obstacle. Behind them, the advancing Egyptian army. Before them, an expansive sea. Unsure how to proceed, they cry out to God, but God rebukes them. "Why do you cry out to me?" It seems our ancestors cry out for good reason, but what we learn is that God won't take the journey for us. God won't steer the ship. If there are seas to cross or courses to correct, we have to be the ones to do that. From a Jewish framework, God acts through us, not to us. Our journeys are our own. Why do you cry out to me? Of note is that our ancestors were never given the exact coordinates for their destination, and it's no different for us. Waiting around in a holding pattern for the right conditions or some sure guarantee of arrival, this does nothing but delay our lives. When it comes to living in the fullest, most meaningful ways, even in a storm of chaos, the only way to move is forward. There's an old parable that says it well. A person has been wandering, lost in a forest for days, can't find the way out. Suddenly, they see another person approaching. Hopeful of the other's knowledge, they ask, "Friend, tell me which is the right way. I've been wandering for days." But then the other replies, "I don't know the way out either, but I can tell you this. Don't take the way I've been taking, for that will lead you astray. Instead, let's look for a new way out together." It turns out that when wayfinding along the journey of our lives to a better place, despite how much we might want them, we don't get to know the final coordinates, because ultimately, the intended final destination is secondary to the journey itself and what we might find along the way there. Want to know how much space the Hebrew Bible gives to the moment our ancestors finally arrive in the Promised Land? After 5,930 verses of Torah anticipating the moment, describing every detail from starting point through the entirety of the path along the way, 51 verses, less than a chapter and a half, not even in Torah itself, to celebrate the finish line. Why? Because the moment they arrive, another entirely different journey reveals itself. There's new ground to cover, a new destination to reach. This is why we say next year in Jerusalem every year. We never get there. Jewish wayfinding doesn't have that fourth and final recognition phase. That would defeat the entire purpose. Yes, there is so much that we've lost, But so too, we've traveled through uncharted waters and discovered new frontiers. We've learned to do old things in new ways, from Zoom B'nai Mitzvah to parking lot Shabbats. We've found new ways to comfort each other. We've learned the names of our neighbors again. We've learned we really are all in this together. These aren't necessarily the destinations we set out for or otherwise would have chosen, but we've arrived there and we've sanctified these moments nonetheless. Judaism teaches that our lives are about the journey, the paths we choose to take along the way, in spite of, or maybe even especially in times of challenge. As God says in this morning's Torah portion, "See, I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life that you may live." These are not coordinates to a final destination. They are road signs. Because wherever we are is a destination in and of itself. Each moment wonderfully perfect or deeply flawed, equally ripe with holiness, all the same. Whether it be us in the blessing of being here next year physically all together, or at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, awakening yet again to a beating but ever-feeling heart. Gemar Chatima Tova. May we all be signed and sealed for truth and kindness, courage and blessing in the book of life. Shana Tova.